Shaun Haney here with Real Agriculture, joined by Justin Funk of AgriStudies. Together we are Real AgriStudies, and we're here to discuss the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index results for May of 2023. I want to thank everybody that completed this month's survey to really provide some actual data to what's on farmers' minds and some of the things they're dealing with on the number of different topics. And we'll compare and contrast, of course, to how people have responded over the prior months. There's definitely some change here to look at. Some of it I don't think is really going to surprise you based on what's happened in terms of the markets and things like that, but we'll dig in. So, Justin, this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, you bet. So this is our May survey, and we had 462 respondents. A little lower than some of our previous ones, but I want everybody to remember I think we caught you in the middle of field activities, and so I really appreciate those who did take the time to do this. Just a recap for those who haven't had a chance to watch one of these videos yet. The whole point of the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index is to give farmers a voice and to share their attitudes and feelings towards certain topics related to financial performance of their farm, state of the ag economy, grain markets, government, and of course, mental health. And so we ask the questions the same way every time. And so that's something, if you complete future sentiment index surveys, you'll get the same questions. But the whole idea is that we're trying to measure how your answers and just how the general feelings out there in the market change based on, well, time of year, where you are in the production cycle, and things that are going on around us in the industry. So in this case, we're going to be sharing with you the May results, but we're also going to go back in time, and we're going to show the aggregated results going back to September when we first launched the study. So here's what we look at. We look at current and future financial performance of the farm. We look at optimism towards the Canadian agriculture industry and the ag economy, both short and long-term outlook. We're going to look at the assessment of the provincial and federal government's ability to support ag. This is something we actually dropped from the previous survey, so there's a bit of a gap there, but we brought it back for this one. And also willingness to make investments in the farm, attitudes towards grain markets and confidence in grain marketing, and the farmer's state of mental health. What we do is we try to measure the index by looking at the positive responses to the questions. We then subtract the negative responses, and what that does is that leaves us with a differential, which we add to 100, and that gives us our index. So really, we can look at any response with a range of 0 to 200. And so the idea is to not just look at it month to month, but then establish a baseline that we'll be able to look at this as a year. And moving forward in future years, we'll be able to compare how we are moving up or down based on the previous year or that benchmark year that we have. So here's an example, and this is actually taken from this month's data set. The question related to financial situation on the farm: is it better off, worse off, or about the same than it was compared to a year ago? In this month's intake, 27.7% of respondents said that they were better off, 28.4% said that they were worse off, and 43.9% said they were about the same. So this is what you're going to see through this video. You're going to see this number that I'm going to show you now. We subtract the worse off from the better off, and that leaves us with the differential, which in this case is 0.7%. You add that to 100, so really, sorry, that's negative 0.7%. What that does is that gives us a negative index of 99.3. Now, this is just below the negative, the neutral line. So it's just in negative territory. So how we play that out on all the questions is we show this line as being our neutral line. And anything that falls above 100 is a positive sentiment. Anything below 100 is a negative sentiment. So 99.3 is barely negative. But this is one of the rare things you're going to see, because in this month's intake, you're going to see that a lot of these things have dipped below that 100 line. So with that, let's just show you here the trend that we've seen over the past several intakes going back to September on current farm financial performance. Remember, we just showed you how we got that. Here we have seen a rather dramatic decline. This one has sort of jumped up and then slowly started to come down in March. And then as we see here in May, it's taken quite a steep decline So farmers are clearly concerned about the current financial performance of the farm.
Yeah, my interpretation here has been, and we talked about this in prior months, we were seeing current farm financial performance increase at a time where markets were starting to trend lower because input prices were backing off. Now we've seen the reality is really set in here, and we've seen a sharper decline in the commodity market overall, across all of them. And now we're seeing, I think, the impacts here in terms of how people feel about their current farm financial performance. And also remember, there's a bit of a dry bias out there as well. Some of this I think is weather related for a good portion of the country. Now, you could probably exclude the Manitoba and maybe parts of, say, eastern Saskatchewan. I'm broad brushing it. I don't mean to ignore people in certain pockets where they feel like I'm not saying that accurately, but there's a dry bias from Maritimes to BC for the most part, and I think that may be showing home here too.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think, having an impact on when we ask people to project out 12 months to future farm financial performance. Now, remember, this has always been negative.
Yeah.
I think the trend that we're seeing is that it probably always will be negative because there's a lot of unknown here. And so, it's not cautious optimism necessarily, but there is some degree of caution here. You can see where it was, at 87 a month, 2 months ago. It's really dropped off now back to 74, which is coincidentally where we started in September. And so I think that there is some fear there as to what the next 12 months are going to bring.
It's kind of interesting that it's fallen back to that exact number that we had in September, right? And I would say that there's a lot more reality to that 74 here today based on what's in front of there's some headwinds when it comes to demand for commodities. A lot of discussion about what happens with the economy globally in the back half of 2023 here. So hopefully, this isn't these two categories are ones where I would like to see them higher because that means the industry is really, really thriving. But I can understand why people would be answering more with a negative tone than they were the past few months.
Yeah. Well, the negativity doesn't end there. When we look at optimism towards the Canadian ag economy, you see that this one was sort of in the similar range as the future financial performance of the farm. You can see here that there is a sharp decline now in May where we've gone from 81. And keep in mind, I mean, we had gotten all the way up to 97, which might have been a blip, okay? But then we went down to 81 and now we're down to 56. And this is related to the short term. This is the 12 months of the Canadian ag economy. I just want to jump ahead real quick here to the future of the Canadian ag industry, which is now more the 5-year outlook of the industry as a whole. We see the same sort of trend happening here. So another sharp decline in the May intake.
I can't pinpoint, other than people being negative about maybe Mother Nature not cooperating on the moisture front, is sort of got people a little bit of a pinch. But I can't explain why we've seen such a drop in the overall optimism or how people feel about the future of the ag industry between, say, basically March to May. Not the only thing that's really changed is we're still kind of dry, and the commodity market has kind of rolled over here, along with some interest rates going up. But does that warrant such a negative bias on something that's, say, 3 years out? I'm not entirely sure about that.
Well, I thought about this when I looked at the numbers. I think this one could be a bit of a lagging indicator. I think that people generally want to be positive. I think, though, when you take a look at some of the other questions, we've seen this when we get to the commodity markets, we've seen the decrease in people's optimism there. And maybe now the reality is kind of setting in that we are maybe in for some harder times. So, it'll be interesting to see when we go and do this again in July to see if the number is remaining in that lower category or if, maybe something changes which causes people to answer a little more positively. But the trend here is definitely, you can see the trend. The trend is showing down. It's just it took a much steeper downward path for this last intake.
And I missed it for May on the optimism towards the Canadian ag economy. This is the same, we ask these same, or we don't ask, Purdue asked these same questions in their ag barometer, should look at how the U.S. farmer answered optimism towards the U.S. ag economy and see if who's being more pessimistic at this current time.
I think generally they have been more pessimistic throughout the year. I think we're finally catching up with respect to the pessimism on these particular items. So Purdue just released their latest report, and I know the headline was "Sentiment Sours," and I think that is pretty much across the board, which is kind of a trend that we're seeing here too.
Very related to the pullback in ag commodities was in the main paragraph.
Now, interestingly enough, despite the trends that we're seeing in farm financial performance, the confidence in making farm investments, is now a good time or is now a bad time. By the way, I just want to say something. In one of the open-endeds, we sometimes get this. I wish you would have given me more choices. Some of these are very black and white. We do that by design for a couple reasons. One, because it's the exact same way Purdue asks it, and we want to be able to draw the same comparisons as closely as we can. But also when we give neutral, like, well, I don't know if now is a good time to make farm investments, we'll probably get a lot of that, and we don't really learn anything. And so we try to force people's responses one way or the other. And so we realize that, it is there can be a gray area, but we really want to know, like, when push comes to shove, do you see now is a good time or now not a good time? So there's a reasoning behind why we limit some of the options in some of the questions. But in this case, you can see there really hasn't changed all that much. I mean, I'm trying to draw a line here. My line pretty much is flat. So now, again, keep in mind, this question was asked just prior to the latest announcement about interest rate hikes. So would we get a different answer if we would have asked it today? Maybe. We'll see in July when we do this one more time.
Well, I can say this because I'm looking at it. I've done some Googling. To give you an example, when it comes to confidence in making farm investments, the U.S. farmer in May was 37. So Canada's low, but we're still higher, relatively speaking. But both countries really in the ditch when it comes to saying, hey, I feel confident here in making farm investments. Now, what's interesting is that this is my confidence in making that farm investment. But up until this point, that I would say this is lack of confidence. Okay, so this is lack of confidence or lack of commitment to the idea this is a good time. This is a good time to do this. People haven't backed off buying land. So, there's clearly that action is still there. We'll see if that does change when Farm Credit Canada comes out with their first 6-month report on land values. But land has sort of been put aside in when it comes to this. Maybe on things like buildings and things like that those actions have been backed off, or putting up new roll bins or whatever. But we've kind of maybe we've bottomed out here a little bit when we look. Maybe 52 is as low as we go in Canada.
Yeah, maybe. And remember, we asked the question why several intakes ago. I think we asked that maybe in January, and the interest rates were one of the reasons, but also was tight inventory at the dealership. So there were some other reasons that kind of explained why people were answering the way they were. So in the last sentiment index, so that would be for March, we did not ask questions around the assessment of the provincial and federal government support of ag, but we did in this one. So you see there's a bit of a gap here. I'm trying to keep the colors the same. So you see there's nothing for March, but what we see is that for the assessment of the provincial government, still, I mean, it's negative and it's decreasing a little bit, but not like the federal government, which continues to be really low. But what's interesting is that we did actually see a bit of a bump in this one here. Now, I don't know what it would have been like in March, but when you go from the January to the May index, it's within a margin of error. So, I mean, we don't really look at this as being meaningful, but there is, especially going from September to May, a gradual increase in people's sentiment there.
Have we done an open-ended box when it comes to the assessment of the provincial government and why people? Because I'm still a little bit perplexed. Now I get in Ontario because there's been a lot of decisions made by the Ford government in Ontario. Bill 97, where they were going to be able to you do 3 acreages on a parcel of land. We've had the decisions on trying to increase home building in the green space or the green belt. Sorry. So I get that one, but for the rest of the country, yeah, not so sure. So on the aggregate, not sure why that's a 79.
And there is, when I sort of take a sneak peek at the data, that there is a difference, pretty significant one between East and West on the provincial government, much lower in the East than it is in the West. So the West
Ontario,
is keeping
Ontario
that
waving
number.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense to me. Okay.
So the areas that I'm most interested in is related to the commodity markets. And if the respondents recall, not only do we ask you about confidence in marketing your crops and the outlook on selling the crops, should I hold or should I sell? But then we jumped in and we asked some questions related to, well, how much of your old and new crop have you sold or do you have left? And so we're going to get to that in a second. But right now, when it comes to confidence, we see that the confidence is on a gradual decline. Farmers are, I think, concerned about the commodity markets. You can see that here. Now, what I want to point out is that with the confidence, which is an inherent quality, right? It's a feeling that I have about my abilities. We see that it's decreasing. The commodity market side is more a prediction, like what I think is going to happen on the next one. Really big decline from September to November, and again from November to January. But then what we see is that it kind of levels out a little bit here. That from March to May is not as big of a drop as we have seen in previous months. So maybe we're going to start to level out there. I don't know.
So, okay, like you said, these are 2 separate things when you look at these. I think on the right, where we have outlook on selling crops, do I think this is a good time to hold or a good time to sell? There's farmers have got their heads wrapped around. There's a real bearish tone to this market, and every Wednesday on Real Ag Radio when we talk to a market analyst, the past 6 weeks, it's been the same strategy recommended by 6 different people: sell the bounces. Okay. We are not in a buy and hold market. We are in a market where you have to be opportunistic and sell the chop when it's going your direction. So that bearish tone makes sense. Well, we need to find ways to, on the left where we have confidence. This is the one that's actually a bit more concerning to me, I think, because you can understand the market is bearish and it's going down, but you can still have confidence in your marketing strategy. So this concerns me that while the market's gone down, we've lost our confidence in what to do. Now, the caveat to that is probably in some of these areas, like I'll think about the prairies, there is still a big hangover from the 2021 drought and how people had to make good with big bucks in terms of some of those grain contracts they could not fill. Okay. In Ontario, it's dry, but there's still, weather has a tendency, and I know I'm going to get an email about this, but weather has a tendency of coming through somewhat or better than it. Like you're not going to get a 10 bushel corn crop. Okay. We had people that were getting 2 bushel barley crops in 21 in the West. So I think this is that confidence in marketing crops. That one's concerning, that we've lost confidence in what we're doing at a time where the market's falling. That's one we got to try to figure out how to help farmers raise that confidence level, even though the market's going the other way.
Right. Well, in a moment, I'm going to show you where people stand with respect to their old and new crop, and I'm going to give you a comparison of how people answered this confidence and outlook questions related to where they are with that crop, and see if you can glean anything from that. Before we do that, though, just one more sentiment area that we need to look at, and that is the state of mental health. And we've seen this one sort of bounce around, slightly negative in September, creeping upwards into November, neutral in both January and March, which is a good thing, by the way. Neutral is not a bad thing at all. And then a slight dip here in May. And when in September, I wondered is, maybe the stress of high production season maybe having an impact. Here we are in May, we see it go down a little bit too. I'm sure there are other factors, but it's interesting to see the trend here overlaid on top of the production cycle.
Yeah, I look at this one as a positive, even though we are in the negative. I think given some of the headwinds that are in front of the farmer right now, we got dry conditions. We talked about the market having very much a bearish tone to it. We clearly have seen the drop in the current and future farm financial performance. Now people feel about the industry. We saw a big drop in terms of optimism towards the future of the ag industry in Canada or the ag economy. We're holding here on state of mental health, which I think I think this one's a positive, showing that we've got some resilience built up a little bit here.
We are, and there's one thing I just want to add here. I'm just looking at my notes. So these differentials that we calculate can be achieved several different ways, right? In this case, just to put this into perspective, 69% of respondents said that my mental health is the same as it was last year, which is a good thing. I mean, we're not saying, I think it's a good thing. 12% said it's better, 18% said it's worse. So, it's not like we're looking at dramatic numbers here saying it's worse. And I want to give a shout out to one of the respondents who put in an open-ended comment box, and I think this is important to share. Said, my mental health a year ago was great, and it still is. Therefore, it's no change. And so that's why I answered it's in a similar position. So similar position can be really, really good. So, this is always a difficult question to analyze. And, without making this a mental health study, we just try to measure the ups and the downs. And, I think that we're observing something here that in general, we're pretty neutral, and that's not a bad place to be.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so let's finish this up. So we asked a couple supplemental questions in this one because we wanted to dig in a little bit deeper, particularly on the grain marketing side of it. We asked people, so this is the question, approximately what percent of your 2022 old crop do you still have left unsold? And 35% said none, 30% said 1 to 10%, and then 11 to 20% was 18%, and then it's just a very small number on the other side. So, what this is essentially telling me is that there's very little old crop still out there, which I think is what you would probably expect to be the case. And then I'll just show you here the new crop. So the 2023 new crop. So this is phrased a little different. What percent have you sold? And you can see just over half have less than 10% sold, which means that 50% have quite a bit still that they have not sold yet.
Yeah, and this is what we've been hearing from a lot of grain companies, grain traders, grain analysts in Canada and the U.S. I will add in the major crop types that we tend to deal with. So I'm not talking about cotton. I'm not talking about rice. The farmer is undersold relative to prior years is what I continue to hear from people. We had Ted Seifert from Zaner Ag Hedge on the radio show this weekend in Chicago. His recommendation on corn is to be 65% sold on new crop. So there's one example. So our chart here does not show this relative to past years of where people were at this time. But if you add this chart and some of the anecdotes that I've heard from the grain trade, I think they connect.
Yeah.
On the left, we talk about percent of old crop. The reason we asked this question is because I had heard from a grain company that there was still about 30% of old crop spring wheat left unsold on the prairies. I thought that cannot be. Kelvin did some research on the StatsCan production number and matched that to the Grain Commission numbers, and I think he worked at like 27%, kind of verifying what we were hearing. Since then, we've continued to check in with the grain trade, and that number is agreed to by a lot of people. The reason why asking this is I think this kind of ties a little bit, and maybe you've got different data to conflict with this, but I think the amount of old crop out there sort of ties very much to the lack of confidence in marketing the grain. If I don't have the confidence in marketing the grain, I'm maybe paralysis by analysis. I'm not pulling the trigger, and that's how I still end up, and you kind of end up, we've watched the market go down, and we're still holding on to old crop that was tied to some much higher prices going back to September or previous, right? So
Yeah, well, so to that point, here is overlaying the old crop versus confidence. And while it's not dramatic, we generally interpret this as saying the more confident you are, the less old crop you have left.
yeah, okay, there you go.
Okay.
Whew.
Yep.
It's nice when the numbers back up my speculation. That's good.
Yeah, and I didn't know your speculation going into this, so I didn't push the number.
And so, not to make light of it, but this, I feel like I sincerely feel for people trying to sort out what is the right marketing decision, because for 3 years, 2 years for sure, okay, 21 and 22, well, actually 2021 and part of 22, the best strategy was grow it, bin it, hold it, and just wait for the market to go higher.
Mm-hmm.
And we have transitioned into a different kind of market here, and some have transitioned quickly and some haven't, and it's difficult. This isn't easy. This is one of the hardest things to try to figure out how I need to, if you need the cash, it's, I got to sell some stuff because I need the cash flow. But if you have the cash flow and you're just trying to make the right marketing decision to maximize the margin, this is difficult.
Well, you probably wouldn't be surprised then when we ask about the new crop. It is sort of a reverse take on it, but essentially what this says is that so when you ask what percent of your 2023 crop have you sold up until this point, less than 10%, 10 to 25%, the more confident I am, the more I have sold up until this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same thing.
Now, I want to go to one more layer of analysis. Same thing, your crop sales versus what you think is going to happen here in the marketplace. And this, for all intents and purposes, Shaun, there is no difference whether you should sell your crop now as prices are headed higher or hold your crop as prices are headed lower based on how much you have left. There's no difference. So that is not. It's remember, this is more based on what am I going to do. The other one is how I think. So I could not say there's any difference on this one.
I had somebody say to me, Justin, maybe one of the also reasons why we still have old crop like we do in a market that's declined could be some tax management. Mm-hmm. That was one idea that was thrown to me by a respondent via email.
Okay. Last chart here on this. So what percentage of 2023 crop have you sold up until this point? And we see right here, those saying I should hold my crop as prices are headed higher are in fact holding their crop. More likely to be. It's not huge, but there is a little bit more of the new crop still being held back.
So they are following through on they're doing what they mean what they say.
Yeah, I mean it's marginal, and it's marginal. And remember, this is looking at percentage of respondents, not percentage of crop, right? So it translates to percentage of crop, but the smaller the numbers we get, so like this 2% here in the green, I don't know if you can see my cursor. That little bar represents actually quite a bit of crop.
Yeah. Well, and hey, the other thing too here is if you do have unsold 22 crop and maybe you're light on new crop sales, you know what? Maybe you will be right. Like that's right now it seems like there's the bias to, we got some problems on the demand side. Who knows? Like that's the other side of this. There's two sides to all trades. So I don't want people to get the impression that we're being critical at all. I think it's just it's a fascinating situation that is happening right now as we transition from old crop to new crop here as we get closer to midsummer.
So that is the May 2023 Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index results. Thank you to everybody who completed our survey, especially at such a busy time of year. This is very important information, and we are just so thrilled that you are engaged and continue to give us these insights and answer the same questions seemingly month after month. But it's important information, and we can't do it without you.
Yeah, we can. A good example is I think this is in those last slide. The last slide in terms of how the $100 should be spent. That's the farmer's opinion, and so I think there's a huge benefit there to be able to show stakeholders here's how farmers think the money should be spent. Quit speculating about it. Here's actually how they think the money should be spent. So that it seems like a small thing, but big impact when it comes to people being willing to fill out those kinds of questions. So thank you, everybody that completed it. If you have any feedback at all on any of the things that we discussed here today in terms of the numbers as well, maybe there's some, you want to take issue with some of the analysis we provided or things that maybe we missed or should look at in future surveys, we'd love to hear from you. Make sure you send us an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. On behalf of Justin and myself, I want to thank everybody that's a member of the RealAgristudies Insights Panel for completing the survey, and look forward to chatting with you next month. Thanks a lot, everybody.